This is the Week in Review for TheTrumpet.com, Friday, March 18th, 2011. On Friday, the United Nations approved a no-fly zone over Libya and airstrikes against Muammar Gaddafi's assault on the rebels. Libya's government responded quickly by announcing a ceasefire, though some observers question its sincerity. The civil war in the country has raged this week. After rebels successfully seized control of several towns, Gaddafi struck back with force last week, retaking the eastern oil city of Ras Lanuf and other towns, and an oil tank was set ablaze by an airstrike, the first hit taken by the country's oil infrastructure. Gaddafi also reclaimed ground seized by rebels in the west. After Friday's announcement of a ceasefire, however, CNN reported that Gaddafi has apparently decided to change tactics and not send forces into the rebels' de facto capital of Benghazi as expected. Gaddafi threatened on Tuesday to ally his forces with al-Qaeda and declare a holy war if Western powers invaded his country. Al-Qaeda has openly schemed to gain a foothold in Libya, with its top-ranking Libyan member last weekend urging his fellow countrymen to overthrow Gaddafi and establish Islamic rule in the nation. Whether because of Gaddafi's rage toward the West or the result of his regime being replaced by Islamist leadership, biblical prophecy shows that the outcome will be the same. Libya will make a rapid turn toward the radical Islamic camp. In Bahrain, three hardline groups announced March 8th that they have united to form a coalition for a Bahraini republic. The new coalition has called for the ruling family to step aside and is seeking a democratic republic. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia sent over 1,000 soldiers into Bahrain on March 14th to combat the Iranian-fueled uprising against the government. Demonstrators from Bahrain's Shiite majority have been protesting against the Sunni monarchy. Demonstrators have been stirred up and supported by Iran through sympathetic clerics and political leaders. Stratfor stated, "The Iranians clearly have an interest in overthrowing the Bahraini regime. Bahrain is the focal point of a struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran for control of the western littoral of the Persian Gulf. An Iranian victory in Bahrain would give hope to the Shia in Saudi Arabia, which is why the Saudis have sent in troops. In this current Middle East crisis, we can see not only an alliance of nations led by Iran coming together, but another alliance that will include Saudi Arabia and other more moderate Arabic states. This alliance is prophesied to ally with Europe, the enemy of Iran." Last Friday night, Palestinian terrorists unleashed the year's deadliest attack against Israelis. Attackers snuck into a private home in the town of Itamar and stabbed 5 members of a family to death, including 2 children and an infant. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas responded to the butchery by denying that the PA incites violence against Israel. However, the very day of the Fogel's funeral, Fatah officials named a town square in Ramallah after a woman terrorist who led a 1978 attack that killed 37 Israelis. The attack highlights the savagery of the Middle East conflict, and indications are that Israel's willingness to try to negotiate a peace deal is nearing an end, just as biblical prophecy suggests will happen. Eurozone nations were forced to surrender more of their sovereignty last week. Leaders met in Brussels to debate a plan to save the euro from further crisis proposed by German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy. They agreed to expand the temporary euro rescue fund for countries facing economic crisis and to laying groundwork for a permanent euro stability mechanism. They also agreed to closely harmonize their budgetary, tax, and social policies to prevent further euro crises. The new pact won't completely solve the euro crisis, but it will increase Germany's ability to enforce greater demands on the rest of the eurozone. It represents another step toward a German-led pan-European government. The most popular candidate in France's presidential election race for next year is a woman noted for her anti-Islamist views. Marine Le Pen, leader of France's far-right National Front, has more support than President Nicolas Sarkozy or the Socialist Party leader, according to a poll published by Le Parisien. The rise in anti-Muslim opinion in France has become mainstream, and even President Sarkozy has announced he wants a public debate on the role of Islam in French society. He is also holding photo ops with nuns and praising France's Catholic foundations. Still, Le Pen's popularity shows that many in France want bolder measures against Islam. Another recent poll shows 42% of the French see Islam as an internal threat, and another found that 2/3 of French and Germans believe that the integration of Muslims into their societies has been a failure. Tensions between Islam and Europe are certain to continue heating up to the boiling point. A massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck Japan last Friday. The nation's largest ever quake occurred off of Japan's eastern coast and triggered a massive tsunami that swept over hundreds of miles of coastline, killing thousands of people. The quake, its aftershocks, and the inundation destroyed homes, businesses, infrastructure, and everything else in its path. The disaster also resulted in the closing of 5 to 8 oil refineries. The earthquake also heavily damaged Japan's nuclear reactors. With Japan in devastating disarray and sustaining drastic energy shortages, Russia is coming to the rescue. Russian President Dmitry Medvedev pledged to send up to 6,000 megawatts of electrical power, 200,000 tons of liquefied natural gas, and a supply of coal over the next 2 months. The national wreckage has forced Japan to build both political and economic bridges to energy-laden Russia. As Japan recovers, watch for it to do so in a closer alliance with its Asian neighbors, particularly Russia and China. Some analysts watching Japan's nuclear reactors have said the nation is in danger of a catastrophe worse than the infamous Chernobyl meltdown. French nuclear safety scientists said this week that they are pessimistic about whether engineers can control the Fukushima power plant after a pool containing spent fuel rods overheated and boiled dry. Radiation levels inside the complex were extremely high after an earlier explosion breached the facility. The fracture could be allowing radiation to escape into the atmosphere. Should they rise farther, extremely high radiation levels in the plant will make it impossible for workers to try to seal the breach without experiencing a lethal dose. Workers have tried to dump water on the site from fire trucks and lead-shielded helicopters with mixed results. The United States has warned Americans in the country to stay away from the area, and the British Foreign Office has warned that all British citizens should leave Tokyo, which is 140 miles away. European Union trade with Latin America set a new record in 2010. Trade between the two regions jumped 31% to $237 billion. Meanwhile, a recent intelligence leak reveals that some U.S. diplomats view the Latin American Mercosur trade bloc as an anti-American tool. Watch for the relationship between the U.S. and its Latin American neighbors to grow even colder as leaders across the continent embrace new trade partners in Europe. Herbert Armstrong's Plain Truth magazine predicted this in July 1965. Flowing across the Atlantic to feed the hungry furnaces of the Ruhr and the other industrial complexes of Europe will come the rich mineral wealth of Latin America. Over 20,000 Britons have signed a new petition calling for a referendum on whether or not their country should remain in the European Union. Each person who signs the People's Pledge promises to vote only for a candidate who publicly promises to support a binding referendum on our EU membership and to vote for it in the House of Commons. On Tuesday, the first day of the campaign, the website crashed due to the volume of visitors. A recent public opinion survey suggests that such a referendum would pull Britain out of Europe. The poll found that 48% of Britons would vote to leave the EU versus only 27% who would vote to stay in. It is only a matter of time before Britain will leave Club Europe. Around 600 Anglicans began the process of converting to Catholicism on March 9th. Known as Ash Wednesday. A spokesman for the Catholic Bishops' Conference explained that the former Anglicans needed to stop receiving communion in the Anglican Church on that date and use the intervening weeks to prepare to receive their first communion in the Catholic Church on Easter. These new converts, which include around 20 priests, will join the special ordinariate set up for them by the Pope. This group will likely swell far beyond 600, with many planning to join in a second wave of converts later. This is the small beginning of a movement that will eventually see the Church of England engulfed entirely by Rome. A recent report shows that the tax system of the United Kingdom includes unique penalties for certain families. CARE, a Christian charity, highlighted the fact that Britons in traditional families with a working father and stay-at-home mother pay more tax than they would in almost any other developed nation. In an average developed country, a married person who is the single wage earner for his family pays roughly half the tax that a single person would pay. But in the UK, he pays nearly 3/4 as much. The UK is almost alone in having no tax provision for families except for some transitional arrangements for a small number of older married couples, the report says. The British government may talk about supporting marriage and family, but its actions are to financially punish traditional families. That is this week's Trumpet.com Week in Review.